Big news this week in Ohio. Of course, we've been closely following the fallout from that horrific, catastrophic train derailment. It was packed full of toxic chemicals, and they did a quote-unquote controlled release, which just basically nuked this entire town with chemicals. People on the ground are reporting all sorts of horrific symptoms. They've been told to drink bottled water as a plume, sort of toxic stew of these chemicals make their way through the Ohio River Valley. Horrible situation. Biden administration caught completely flat-footed here, especially Mayor Pete as head of the Department of Transportation. And after some similar silence, honestly, from the Republican side, including J.D. Vance, who is the new senator from Ohio, they now have sort of seized on this as a moment that they can capitalize on. And we have news that Donald Trump, former President Trump, potentially future President Trump, is headed to East Palestine this week. Let's go ahead and put this up on the screen. He posted on True Social in response to a report that he was planning to make the trip, that the residents of East Palestine are great people who need help now. He later posted he will visit there on Wednesday. We also had Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance was really kind of late to the party here. It took him 9 days to put out any kind of statement, but now they are sending a letter to the Department of Transportation and former Mayor Pete Buttigieg, current Secretary Pete Buttigieg. Go ahead and put this part up on the screen. Focused in particular on the staffing, the number of workers that are on any of these trains. Remember, these things are massive, 150 cars. I think the stat I saw, this is a 1.5 mile long train, and you've got just a few people on there. So they say it is not unreasonable to ask whether a crew of 2 rail workers plus 1 trainee is able to effectively monitor 150 cars, while officials at the department's Federal Railroad Administration have said that data are inconclusive when it comes to the effects of precision scheduled railroading on rail safety. I'll tell you what that means in a minute. Derailments have reportedly increased in recent years, as has the rate of total accidents or safety-related incidents per track mile. The trade-off for Class 1 rail companies, of course, has been reduced labor costs, having shed nearly 1/3 of their workforce. And Emily, this gets at some of the core issues that were raised by rail workers themselves and their union representatives. They have been expressing deep concern, including, potentially going on strike, which was ultimately broken by a bipartisan coalition of Democrats and Republicans, that they were really concerned about the amount of crew members on these trains, because they've been trying to go from this 2 crew member situation, which already seems like a disaster, down to 1 crew member only on these massive freight trains. And at the same time, the precision scheduled railroading, I mean, this is basically profits over people. We're going to push our workers as hard as we possibly can, deny them basic time off that most workers take for granted, and really push them to the brink, which has, of course, major safety implications when you have people who are exhausted and overworked, basically alone on these trains trying to keep things on the rails, to use a terrible pun.
I mean, it's not that bad because it's so literally true. And Ryan and I did what I thought was a kind of terrifying interview last week on Counterpoints with an Ohio rail worker who talked about exactly how many safety concerns come up with the precision scheduling. And a lot of people during those negotiations were looking at it and saying, you have to give 30 days notice for your sick leave? Well, it's because it's exactly because of what you were talking about, that they're trying to go from 2 to 1, but they already just have 2 or they already just have 3. Think about what that means for the railroad. They have to know exactly who's going to be where at every time because they're down to bare bones so that they can maximize their profits. That's the only reason they're doing it. There's no safety reason to have that few people. There's no reason other than money. That's it. That's it.
That's exactly right. And these rail companies have been raking in money hand over fist.
Yes.
Huge multi-million-dollar executive bonuses, stock buybacks, and yet letting go of 1/3 of their workforce at a time, again, when with supply chain issues, like we ended up really needing to rely on freight rail. So laying off their workforce, pushing these people ultimately to the brink, also that they could line their pockets further. Though, Emily, I'm very curious in your view of this, because what I noted is that all of these people were basically silent on what was going on in East Palestine for all the politicians, right, left, it didn't matter. And then Mayor Pete made this very ill-advised comment at a conference where he's like touting the infrastructure bill, whatever. And he said some stupid thing about how like construction crews were too white and they didn't reflect the communities they were working in, whatever, in the same speech where he said nothing about this.
Yep.
And it was at that moment that Fox News picks up coverage. JD Vance is going on with Tucker Carlson because they had now their sort of like culture war in to this situation, which allowed them to ignore the fact that, oh, it was Trump's administration that took off some of the rail brake and other safety regulations that may have contributed to, if not this crash, making this crash much more devastating because of the number of trains that ultimately derailed, and helped to try to loosen regulations in terms of, the classifications of these trains as toxic and flammable. So when they got their culture war angle, they were like able to ignore all of that and just focus on this much more comfortably. But now they're leaning in, and the Biden administration is still sort of like tiptoeing around this. And again, Pete really looking bad in this whole situation.
Really looking bad. I mean, even he had nothing to say. He's the transportation secretary. So, and it wasn't just Republicans that were being quiet about it for too long. It was the transportation secretary himself.
Yes.
Even the media seemed to not recognize, let's just say from a purely sort of it leads, profit-interested perspective, they didn't realize what a story was unfolding in East Palestine. They just had no idea about it because they don't pay any attention, and these stories aren't as neat and clean as they like them to be, and they have all kinds of corporate sponsors that would prefer if they didn't talk about them.
Right.
But now that the story is unfolding, it is true that Republicans are seeing this as a big opportunity, not just to talk about it, but then you get, like you said, Vance and Rubio coming out. And Rubio was great back in the fall with the negotiations because that speaks to how bad it really speaks to how bad the management of these railroads is, and it really speaks to how bad the regulatory management of these railroads is, that you have realignment Republicans not just sort of tiptoeing in, but saying, hey, this is a pitch right down the middle. We can knock this out of the park because it is so obviously corrupt and so obviously exploitive that you even have, Republicans like eagerly now latching onto the issue because it speaks to just how bad the management is and how unfair the situation is and how egregious this is. And I think the person to watch going forward is Mike DeWine. I think he's really had a tough time.
The governor of Ohio, for people who don't know.
Right, a Republican governor of Ohio who's, I think, really had a tough time managing this situation in a way that just on the political level, I mean, obviously on a moral level, it has been horrible, but on a political level, I think has given other Republicans, Vance included, an opportunity to sort of step into a vacuum.
Yeah, and Vance, again, after saying, failing to even put out a statement for 9 days, he's now all in, he's traveled there, he's making videos on the ground, he's sending this letter with Rubio. And again, I think it's because they were given an angle that allowed them to just criticize the Biden administration without having to reflect on the failures of the quote-unquote populist Republican President Donald Trump, who did more than anyone. Now, let me be clear. This and our partners at The Lever have tracked this better than anyone. And, this has been such a great story to make the pitch that independent news is absolutely vital and critical because the rest of the media is basically engaged in like a cover-up of how we actually got here. But they have tracked that the problem started in the Obama administration, where the Obama administration, to their credit, tried to put in some additional safety regs, but ultimately bent to industry on some key classifications of these trains and, involving this specific type of chemical that was contained on this train that led to this not being classified as a high hazard flammable train, which, come on, guys. I mean, common sense dictates when you see a giant fireball, perhaps this was a high hazard flammable train. So that was Obama. The Trump administration went even further, rolled back even more safety regs, and in particular, this type of modern braking system, which prevents the accordion effect that leads to huge numbers of train cars derailing when you have an accident like this. That was the Trump administration. They rolled that back and were very friendly with industry and basically gave them everything they want. Biden administration comes in, they leave the Trump lack of regulations in place, and they also, ignore the concerns that are being raised by rail workers and help side with the boss class to crush the movement for them to get, the basic like sick leave and conditions that would allow them to conduct these trains, to drive these trains safely. So So all of these administrations are ultimately complicit. Now you have the Republicans who are able to seize on like just the Biden administration angle and ignore all of that. But nonetheless, they're the ones that are on the ground. They're the ones who have like decided to really lean into this issue at a time when we're going to have Rich McHugh on later, a journalist who's on the ground. Like the concerns on the ground are very real and they're absolutely continuing.
They're terrifying.
Yes.
Absolutely terrifying. And final thought on all of this. I mean, another great example, you have Elaine Chao. Every time Donald Trump attacks her and someone has a question about her potentially corrupt foreign interests, the media has to step in and herald her as some sort of girl boss, right? Like just a great human being and just a champion for all Americans because she was attacked by Donald Trump or because somebody dared to say something about her potentially corrupt interests. And now you can see what happens under the nose of people like Pete Buttigieg. The same thing happens to him. He'll get really friendly treatment that allows him to think he can skate on substantive issues. It's like the iceberg, right? The media sees something shiny above the surface, but beneath the surface, they don't want to talk about what's there.
Hey guys, ready or not, 2024 is fully upon us now, and Soccer and I have been brainstorming ways that we can really up our game for this critical election.
Yeah, we rely on our premium subs to expand our coverage, to add staff, to upgrade the studio. We just want to give you the best independent coverage of this election, which is possible. So if you can help us out, become a premium subscriber today, breakingpoints.com, or the link is down here in the description video. It really means the world to us. And if you like what we're all about, this is the best possible way to keep us 100% independent, working only for you.